I went to visit my son-in-law, and then I saw my wife's car parked right outside his gate. Here's what I heard when I got close enough to listen. My hands were still shaking an hour later. I stood by that window for maybe 90 seconds, and in those 90 seconds, 29 years of my marriage turned into something I no longer recognized. I never once pictured myself becoming the kind of man who creeps up to a window to listen in on his own family. But that afternoon, standing quietly on the grass outside my son-in-law's house, two voices came through that glass and cracked something open in me that I didn't even know could break. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 61 years old, and I spent 34 years teaching shop class at Aurora Central High School before I retired 2 summers ago. Up until that Tuesday in March, I believed I had a solid life, a steady marriage, a daughter I was proud to call my own, and a son-in-law I trusted enough to hand him my truck keys without a second thought. I want to walk you through this whole thing from the start, because a man doesn't wake up one morning and decide to tear his own marriage apart. Something has to happen first, something that changes the way he sees every single day that came before it. And what happened to me began with something as ordinary as taking a different road home from the hardware store. I'm telling you this story because I think a lot of people out there have felt what I felt that day. That cold, sinking feeling when the world you built with your own 2 hands turns out to be sitting on a foundation of sand. Stick with me here, because this isn't going to end the way you think it will. To understand what happened, you need to know who Carol was to me. We got married when I was 32 and she was 29, back in 1994, in a small church on Colfax Avenue that isn't even there anymore. Carol worked as a dental hygienist for most of our marriage. Steady hours, steady paycheck, the kind of woman who kept the house running while I graded shop projects at the kitchen table every night. We had one daughter, Megan, born in 1997, and Carol raised that girl like she hung the moon. I always respected that about her. Whatever else was true, Carol loved our daughter fiercely. Megan grew up, went to Colorado State, and came back to Denver with a marketing degree and a boyfriend named Derek Cole. Derek sold cars at a dealership off Havana Street, the kind of guy who could talk to anybody, always had a joke ready, always shook my hand a little too hard, like he was trying to prove something. Megan married him in 2021, and I walked her down the aisle myself, feeling like the luckiest father in Aurora. Derek called me Pop from day one. He asked me to help him build a deck on the house he and Megan bought over on Birchwood Court, and we spent 2 Saturdays out there with a circular saw and a case of beer, and I thought, this is a good kid. I trusted him. Looking back now, there were small things. Carol started going over to help Megan organize the house, more than seemed necessary. Sometimes on days Megan herself wasn't even home yet from work. Carol got a new phone in January and started keeping it face down on the counter, something she'd never done in 29 years. I noticed these things the way you notice weather changing, without really registering the storm that's coming. I had no reason to suspect anything. Not yet. The Tuesday it happened started out completely normal. I had a dentist appointment that morning, and afterward I stopped by the hardware store on Parker Road to pick up a box of screws for a birdhouse I was building in the garage, one of those little retirement projects that kept my hands busy. It was around 2 in the afternoon, sun out, not a cloud anywhere, one of those early spring Denver days, where the air still has a bite to it, but you can feel summer coming. I had no plans to see Megan or Derek that day at all. But driving home, I hit a detour on Iliff Avenue, some kind of roadwork with orange cones blocking the right lane, and the only way around it took me straight past Birchwood Court. I hadn't planned it, but once I was 3 blocks from their house, I figured why not stop in. Derek had mentioned the week before that his truck was making a strange sound, and I still had my tools in the bed of my own truck from the birdhouse project. I thought I'd swing by, take a look under the hood, maybe surprise Megan too if she happened to be home from work early. It felt like exactly the kind of thing a father-in-law does. Simple kind, no big deal. I turned onto Birchwood Court a little after 2:30. The street was quiet, the way most streets in that neighborhood are on a weekday afternoon, kids still at school, most people still at work. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, sprinklers running on somebody's lawn, 2 houses down, a mail truck parked at the corner. I had absolutely no idea that in about 90 seconds, that peaceful little street was going to become the place where my old life ended, and I didn't even know it yet. I pulled up along the curb outside Derek and Megan's house, a light blue 2-story with the deck we'd built, still holding up nice after 2 years, and that's when I saw it. Parked right at the edge of the driveway, Close to the little iron gate that led to that side yard was Carol's silver Toyota Camry. I knew that car anywhere. I'd bought it for her birthday 4 years earlier, and I knew the little dent in the back bumper from where she backed into a shopping cart at the King Soopers on Mississippi Avenue. At first, my brain did what brains do. It reached for the simplest explanation. Megan must be sick, I thought, and Carol came over to help her. Or maybe they're planning something for Megan's birthday, which was coming up in 3 weeks, and Carol didn't want to say anything on the phone. I sat in my truck for a second, actually smiling a little, thinking I was about to walk in on some kind of surprise party planning session. But then something didn't add up. Megan's car, a white Subaru, wasn't in the driveway at all. Megan worked until 5 most days at her marketing job downtown, and it was only 2:30. If Carol was here helping Megan with something, Megan herself wasn't even home. So why was my wife's car parked at my son-in-law's house? In the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, while my daughter was still at work 40 minutes away. I sat there a moment longer, and something cold moved through my chest, quiet and slow, like a draft coming in under a door. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Carol had every right to visit her daughter's house, but some part of me, the part that had spent 34 years reading teenagers, and knowing exactly when one of them was lying to my face, told me to get out of that truck quietly instead of walking straight up and knocking. I got out of the truck slow and eased the door shut, instead of letting it slam the way I usually did. I don't fully know why I did that. Some part of me, maybe the part that had already noticed the phone kept face down on the counter and the extra trips to help Megan organize, already suspected something before my mind caught up to it. I walked across the grass instead of the concrete path, keeping to the side of the house where the kitchen window looked out toward the side yard. My work boots barely made a sound on the lawn, still soft from the sprinklers running that morning. As I got closer, I could hear voices coming from inside, low at first, muffled through the glass. My heart had already started pounding by then, hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. I told myself right up until the last few steps that I was just being paranoid, that in a second I was going to hear Carol and Derek talking about paint colors or a birthday cake, and I was going to feel foolish for creeping around my own daughter's house like a burglar. I stopped just beside the kitchen window, back pressed against the warm brick, close enough now that the voices were clear. I recognized Carol's laugh first, that particular laugh she does when she's genuinely enjoying herself, low and easy, nothing like the polite laugh she used at church functions or family dinners. And then I heard Derek's voice answer her, closer than it should have been, softer than a son-in-law talks to his mother-in-law, and every hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I held my breath and leaned in just slightly, close enough to hear every single word clearly through the old, thin window glass. "She still has no idea," Derek said, and I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the kitchen tile. "Megan thinks you're at the store." Carol's voice came back soft, almost playful, nothing like the voice she used with me. "She'll be at work until 5. We've got time." Then I heard a sound I never in my life expected to hear through that window, a long, quiet silence followed by Derek saying, "Come here," in a voice that had absolutely nothing fatherly or innocent about it. I stood frozen against that brick wall, my whole body gone cold despite the sun on my back. Carol laughed again, that same easy laugh, and said something I almost didn't catch. "Walter still thinks I'm running errands." My own name, coming out of my wife's mouth in my son-in-law's kitchen, on a Tuesday afternoon while my daughter sat at a desk downtown with no idea what was happening in her own home. I heard Derek's voice again, lower now. "How long do we keep doing this before we just tell them?" And Carol answered without any hesitation at all, like she'd already thought this through 100 times. "Not yet. Not until the house sale goes through. I'm not losing my half of that money because you got impatient." I stood there with my hand flat against the brick, feeling the whole world tilt sideways underneath me. 29 years of marriage, and my wife was standing in my son-in-law's kitchen, talking about money and timing, like she was planning a business deal, instead of destroying 2 families at once. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe right. All I could do was stand there in the sun and listen to my entire life, fall apart one sentence at a time, every second stretching out longer than it should have. My own heartbeat pounding louder in my ears than the voices coming through that thin glass window. I stayed against that wall longer than I should have, because some sick part of me needed to hear the rest of it. What I learned in the next 2 minutes changed everything I thought I understood about my own family. Carol and Derek weren't just talking about an affair. They were talking about money, real money, the kind that takes planning. Derek mentioned a house he and Megan owned free and clear on the east side. A rental property Megan didn't even know. Derek was quietly trying to sell through a buddy of his in real estate, cutting Megan out of half its value through some paperwork trick with an LLC he'd set up in his name only. Carol, it turned out, had been helping him hide the sale from Megan, using her dental hygienist connections and her maiden name to receive part of the payment quietly into an account Derek had opened for her, something she called our safety net, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I heard her say, clear as day, once that money clears, we figure out what we tell them. Them, meaning me, meaning Megan. Two people who trusted them completely, reduced to a problem to be managed once the money was safely moved. I realized then that this wasn't some reckless, emotional affair born out of loneliness or bad judgment. This was calculated. Carol had been quietly moving pieces around for months, maybe longer, using her own daughter's trust and her husband's trust as tools to get what she wanted. 29 years I'd known this woman, and I was standing outside a window, discovering I never really knew her at all. I backed away from that wall slowly, careful not to make a sound, my mind racing faster than it had in years, already understanding one thing with complete clarity. I wasn't going to walk in there and yell. That's not who I am. But I was absolutely 100% going to make sure Carol Higgins learned exactly what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. I walked back across that lawn the same quiet way I'd come, got into my truck, and sat there for a solid 5 minutes without turning the key. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I remember staring at the birdhouse pieces stacked in the passenger seat, thinking how strange it was that an hour ago my biggest concern that day was whether I had enough screws to finish a project in my garage. Now I was sitting outside my son-in-law's house, feeling like somebody had reached into my chest and rearranged everything inside it. I drove around for almost 2 hours after that, no real direction, just following streets I'd driven 1,000 times. Past the high school where I used to teach, past the church where Carol and I got married, past the King Soopers where she'd dented that Camry bumper. Every single memory I passed felt different now. Like I was looking at old photographs and realizing somebody had been standing just outside the frame the whole time, someone I never noticed. I thought about calling Megan right then and there, just laying it all out for her over the phone. But something told me to slow down. Megan was at work, and dropping a bomb like that on her over the phone, without any proof beyond what I'd overheard, felt reckless. I'm not a reckless man. 34 years teaching teenagers taught me that the worst decisions almost always get made in the first 5 minutes of anger. So I made myself a promise, sitting in that truck on a side street off Yosemite. I wasn't going to say a single word to Carol that night. I wasn't going to confront Derek. I was going to go home, act completely normal, and start paying very, very close attention. If Carol Higgins wanted to play a quiet, careful game, she'd just met the wrong opponent. I'd spent 3 decades outsmarting teenagers who thought they were smarter than me. I could handle this. That night I sat across from Carol at our own kitchen table while she talked about her day, telling me she'd stopped by the store and then swung by Megan's to drop off some Tupperware. I nodded along, asked easy questions, kept my voice exactly the same as always, and inside I felt something harden into place that had never been there before. I'm not proud of how naturally the lying came to me that night, but I told myself it wasn't lying. It was gathering information, same as I used to do when I suspected a kid in my shop class was about to do something he shouldn't with a table saw. Over the next week, I started noticing everything I'd been too trusting to notice before. Carol's new phone stayed face down constantly, and she started taking it into the bathroom when it buzzed. She mentioned helping Megan 3 more times that week, always on days I later confirmed. Megan was actually at work the whole time. I found a receipt in her coat pocket from a coffee shop on Havana Street, not far from Derek's dealership, dated for a Wednesday morning when Carol had told me she was at her sister's. I didn't say a word about any of it. I kept building the birdhouse in the garage, kept mowing the lawn on Saturdays, kept being exactly the husband I'd always been, all while quietly writing dates and times down in a small notebook I kept in my truck's glove box. My shop teacher instincts kicked in hard during that week. You don't catch a kid cheating by accusing him the second you suspect something. You watch, you document, and you wait until you have something undeniable. That's exactly what I decided to do with my own wife. About 10 days after that Tuesday, I called an old student of mine, Marcus Delgado, who I'd taught back in the early 2000s, and who now ran a small private investigation business out of Lakewood. Marcus remembered me right away, said I was the reason he learned how to properly wire a house, and told me he'd help me out at a friend's rate. I met him at a diner on Colfax and laid out everything I'd heard: the affair, the rental property, the account under Carol's maiden name. Marcus didn't even blink. He'd heard worse, he said, and he could have real answers for me within 2 weeks. What Marcus found over those 2 weeks confirmed everything and then some. Derek had indeed set up an LLC 3 months earlier, using an address that traced back to a P.O. box, and the rental property Megan believed was still fully hers, and Derek's was already under contract to sell for $210,000. Marcus pulled records showing Carol had opened an account at a credit union across town using her maiden name, Carol Whitfield, 6 weeks before I ever stood outside that kitchen window. He also found 4 separate hotel charges on a card linked to that account, all at a place off I-25, all timed for Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, the exact days Carol always claimed to be running errands or helping Megan. I sat in my truck outside Marcus's office holding that folder, feeling strangely calm, calmer than I expected to feel. The shaking, angry part of that first day outside the window had settled into something colder and steadier. I finally had proof, real proof, not just words through a window, and now I had a decision to make about exactly how I was going to use it. The first person I called after Marcus wasn't Megan. It was a divorce attorney named Patricia Sundstrom, whose office sat on Spear Boulevard, recommended to me by an old teaching colleague who'd gone through a messy split a few years back. I sat in Patricia's office with Marcus's folder on my lap and told her everything. Patricia listened without any surprise on her face at all, the kind of calm you only get from someone who has heard every version of this story 100 times before. Colorado is what they call an equitable distribution state, Patricia explained, which meant Carol wasn't automatically entitled to half of everything just because we were married. Since Carol had been actively hiding assets in an account under her maiden name, that alone changed things significantly in my favor if we ever went to court. Patricia advised me to quietly document our full financial picture. First, every account, every asset, every retirement fund, before Carol had any idea I knew anything at all. She told P. Lane, the spouse who moves first and moves quietly almost always ends up better protected. Over the following week, I did exactly that. I pulled statements from our joint retirement accounts, our house's current value, the small rental property Carol and I owned together near Sloan's Lake that she didn't know I'd already started researching separately. I moved a portion of my own pension into an account solely in my name, completely legal, completely within my rights, on Patricia's advice. I updated my will without telling a soul. Every quiet move I made felt less like anger now, and more like a man simply making sure his own house was finally built on solid ground instead of sand, for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit. The hardest part of those 2 weeks wasn't dealing with Carol. It was sitting across from Megan at brunch on a Sunday, watching my daughter laugh about some story from her office. Completely unaware that her marriage was quietly being drained out from under her by the 2 people she trusted most in the world. I came close to telling her right there over pancakes at a diner on Alameda Avenue, the words sitting right at the back of my throat. But Patricia had warned me that once Megan knew, the whole situation could move fast and messy, maybe before I had everything locked down the right way. So I held it in, which might have been the hardest thing I've ever done as a father. Instead, I started asking Megan careful, casual questions, the kind that wouldn't raise any flags. I asked how the rental property was doing, and she told me Derek handled all of that, said he mentioned refinancing it soon for a better rate, no mention of any sale at all. I asked if she and Derek had any big plans coming up, and she just laughed and said work had been so busy she barely saw him some weeks. Every answer she gave me confirmed she had absolutely no idea what was happening around her. I left that brunch that Sunday and sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time before I could bring myself to drive home. I thought about the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders at the Aurora Reservoir, the girl who used to help me sandwood in the garage on Saturday mornings, completely trusting that her dad and her mom were solid ground under her feet. I made myself a promise in that parking lot. Whatever happened next, Megan was going to come out of this protected, informed, and standing on her own 2 feet, even if it meant I had to burn my own marriage down to make it happen. Patricia and I decided the sale closing date was the moment to act. since that's when Derek's LLC would receive the full $210,000, and Carol's hidden account would show the wire transfer she thought nobody would ever trace back to her. Marcus confirmed the closing was scheduled for a Friday morning at a title company off Parker Road, 3 weeks after that first Tuesday outside the window. Patricia filed my divorce paperwork quietly 2 days before that closing, timed so it would be served the same week, alongside a formal notice to the title company flagging Megan's ownership interest in that rental property, something Derek's LLC trick couldn't legally erase, no matter how clever he thought it was. I also did one more thing Patricia didn't exactly recommend, but didn't stop me from doing either. The night before the closing, I sat Megan down at my own kitchen table, the same table Carol and I had eaten 1,000 dinners at, and I finally told her everything. I showed her Marcus's folder, the photos, the account records, the hotel receipts. I watched my daughter's face go through about 5 different emotions in under a minute: shock, disbelief, and then something I'll never forget. A kind of quiet fury that reminded me so much of myself it almost scared me. Megan didn't cry, not that night. She sat there staring at that folder for a long time, then looked up at me and said, "Dad, what do we do? Not what do I do? What do we do?" In that moment, sitting at that kitchen table, I understood something clearly. Whatever Carol and Derek thought they were getting away with, they'd made one critical mistake. They underestimated exactly how much fight still lived in this family. They thought they could quietly rob blind. Friday morning came fast. Megan and I sat in her Subaru in the parking lot of the title company on Parker Road at 9 in the morning, watching Derek's car pull in at 9:15, completely unaware his own wife was parked 40 feet away. We watched him walk inside with a folder under his arm and a spring in his step like a man about to collect money he thought was already his. Patricia had arranged for the divorce papers and the ownership notice to be delivered right there at the title company, timed perfectly with a process server she'd hired, a broad-shouldered man named Gary, who walked in about 10 minutes after Derek did. Megan and I walked in right behind Gary. Derek was sitting at a conference table with the title agent when he saw Megan, and I watched every ounce of color drain out of his face in real time. Before he could say a word, Gary placed the paperwork in front of him, explaining calmly that the sale couldn't proceed as structured because Megan Cole held a legal ownership interest in the property that hadn't been properly disclosed. The title agent, a no-nonsense woman named Denise, immediately froze the transaction pending review, exactly like Patricia predicted she would. Derek looked at Megan, then at me, and I watched him try to find words that weren't there. "Pop, I can explain," he said, and I looked at him with a calm I didn't know I had in me and said, "Save it for the lawyers, Derek." Megan didn't say a single word to him. She just set an envelope on the table, the same folder of evidence, and walked out of the title company with her head held high, me right beside her, while Derek sat there realizing in real time that his careful, quiet plan had just collapsed completely in front of everyone in that room. Carol got served the divorce papers that same Friday evening at the house we'd lived in for over 2 decades. I watched her face change as she read through them at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd once told me she loved me more than anything in this world. She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something close to the old Carol, scared, small, aware of exactly what she'd lost. "Walter, please, we can talk about this," she said, her voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since her mother passed years earlier. I stood in that kitchen doorway and told her calmly that I'd already heard everything I needed to hear, weeks ago, through a window on Birchwood Court. Her face went white. She knew exactly what that meant. She tried explaining it away as a mistake, as loneliness, as something that just happened, but I'd already heard her own voice through that window, talking about timing and money like it was a business transaction, and no amount of crying at that kitchen table was going to rewrite what I'd heard with my own ears. Megan cut off all contact with Derek within a week and filed for divorce herself, keeping full ownership of the rental property once the title company review confirmed everything Patricia had flagged. Derek lost the sale entirely, lost his job at the dealership 2 months later, once word got around the small Denver real estate circles about what he'd tried to pull, and lost Megan for good. Carol moved into an apartment near her sister's place in Westminster, and the divorce finalized 4 months after that Friday at the title company, with Patricia making sure Carol's hidden account and her share of our shared assets reflected exactly what a court considers fair once hidden money gets uncovered, which is to say, considerably less than she expected. It's been almost a year now since that Tuesday afternoon on Birchwood Court, and I still think about how close I came to walking right up to that front door instead of standing quietly by that window. If I'd knocked instead of listened, I probably would have gotten a story, some excuse, some version of the truth carefully edited to keep me in the dark a while longer. Instead, I got the real thing, ugly and painful as it was, and it gave me the chance to protect my daughter and myself before either of us lost everything we'd worked for. I still live in the same house on our old street, though it's just mine now, paid off free and clear, with a garage full of half-finished woodworking projects and a birdhouse from that very first Tuesday still sitting proudly on a fence post out back. Megan comes by most Sundays now, and we've gotten closer than we've been in years, maybe because we went through something together that neither of us saw coming. She's doing well, dating someone new, someone steady, someone who doesn't need to hide phones or set up secret LLCs. Carol and I speak maybe twice a year, brief and civil, mostly about nothing important. I don't feel angry anymore, not the way I did that first week. What I feel now is something closer to peace, the kind that comes from knowing you handled something the right way, carefully, patiently, without losing yourself in the process. I built my whole career teaching kids that patience and preparation beat panic every single time, and it turns out that lesson held up just fine when it was my own life on the line. If you've made it this far with me, thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had that same cold feeling that something in your own life wasn't quite what it seemed, trust that feeling. Sometimes, the quietest, most careful move you make is the one that saves everything.